You have the virtual machine monitor sitting on the top of the host operating system. So for example, if you have a Windows 7 machine as your host operating system and you're running several virtual machines on it, it could be a Linux virtual machine, the other could be a Mac virtual machine, the other could be even HP virtual machine. So you could have different operating systems running on top of this virtual machine monitor. Okay? So the underlying operating system is something different. And this has to be compatible with the hardware. For example, if you use Windows 7 or anything Windows based, this has to be, say, what? x86 Intel chip based, right? Anything compatible with Windows. To run this to be a Mac operating system, it has to be what? A PowerPC hardware, like anything to do with Apple or Mac. Okay? So the host operating system has to have a compatible hardware with what we call the instruction set architecture. Have you heard of that terminology? Okay. Instruction set architecture, which the operating system uses to interact with the hardware. Okay. So Windows has its own ISA with x86. Mac has its own instruction set architecture with PowerPC. Okay. I think that's what it's called, right, for Mac. The hardware name, yeah.
Are they using Intel now then?
They could, but I'm not sure. So Mac uses traditionally this, Linux uses x86, Windows uses x86. That's the traditional approach. So when you want to run, as I said, a Mac on x86, it may or may not run. Similarly, Windows on PowerPC may or may not run. Traditionally, it will not run. So if we have something like this, nowadays we have all this quad core, all these processes, so which means we have really multiple processes, but they are not really effectively used, because if you're running only one operating system, say only one process or some user processes are running, you're not really using all the capacity of the machine, right? Say for example, you're running servers. If you don't really do any virtualization, if you have a huge organization, then you have to run separate servers, separate physical machines like a file server, a web server, database server, email server, and all this stuff. So you have to invest on all these physical resources, and they are not really effectively being used. Okay? So instead, you can run all these 4 servers on one physical machine, each server running on a virtual machine. And also, if any of the servers are attacked from a security point of view, only that virtual machine will be affected. The other servers will not be affected. The physical machine will not be affected. Okay? Clear? And you can even do what's called plug and play, which means like you do for a project, you can create a virtual machine, install some software on it, and you can create an image of it, and basically save it as a file, an ISO file, and take it and run it somewhere else. You can load that virtual machine somewhere else, as long as you have a kind of the virtual machine monitor. So like the Oracle VirtualBox they're using is kind of like a virtual machine monitor. Okay? You could use a VMware workstation, or you could use even VM player. There's a well-known company called what? VMware, which markets all this virtualization software. Okay? So that is hosted architecture where you have this virtual machine monitor kind of mediating between the, we call these as a guest operating system, where the operating system on which you run the virtual machines, and this is the host operating system. Okay? So where do you use this? We use them traditionally again, and these virtual machines could be independent of each other, in the sense that each could be a different server, and you could stop one server and the other servers, or if one server needs to be kind of maintenance issue something, you can really do something on that, the other servers could be still running, or if one is attacked, you can just stop that, the others will be still okay, right? The host will be still okay. So as long as they are independent, and also it's not really delay sensitive. Why? Because everything these virtual machines have to do on the hardware, every what we call a privilege instruction. For example, if you want to open a file, you're running say a Linux operating system, you want to open a file and write to the file, it has to go through a system call and all these things. So that has to be mediated through this virtual machine monitor, the host operating system, and underlying hardware. We'll see that now. That's a time-consuming process. So we don't use this hosted architecture if you're really working with, say, real-time applications. Okay? And in such cases, you have mostly like embedded systems, real-time applications. You go for what's called a bare metal architecture, where the virtual machine operating system can directly interact with the hardware. Okay, of course, the virtual machine monitor is here, but it won't interfere much. In terms of that, somewhere here you will see, we call this as a thick hypervisor. So I said this is also called a hypervisor. The virtual machine monitor is also called as a hypervisor. So on a hosted architecture, it's called a thick hypervisor, whereas here we call it as a thin hypervisor because it doesn't do much. On a bare metal architecture, the VMM is very less code and lightly loaded. Okay? Whereas in the other one, it does most of the job. Okay? So here we call it as thin hypervisor. And where we use this bare metal, as I said, for real-time applications, where there is some interaction between the virtual machines. So for example, this could be a medical image processing application where you have some image that needs to be processed in real time by a certain operating machine, and it needs to be done faster. Whereas there could be some aspect of the application which requires user input, and that could be run on a different operating system or a virtual machine. Okay, and this is what I say, a general purpose virtual machine. So this could run slowly, but they do kind of interact with each other, and they also need to access the underlying hardware pretty quickly. So you need to run them directly on the hardware. That's why it's called a bare metal architecture. And the VMM doesn't do much in this case. Okay. So you have hypervisors for each category. So these are some of the examples for this category. VMware Workstation or even Oracle VirtualBox will be examples for hosted architecture. Any question up to this point?
Dr. May, do you know if on the hosted architecture, if it makes any difference whether the VM is running the same OS as the host OS?
Doesn't make a difference. You could run
As far as performance.
Right.
So like if you have a VMware running Windows Server, a Linux server, and the host is Windows, would it make a difference?
No.
Which one goes faster to the hardware?
As we will see, when you run a host architecture, right, everything goes to the host operating system. So even though you have multiple virtual machines, they are not really running in parallel. Okay, so because the virtual machine has to do anything on the hardware, it has to go through a context switch and go through the host operating system. So it's really going to be slower if you run multiple virtual machines, and if you run, say, a Windows on the top of the same Windows version, right? If the underlying Windows takes much time, that Windows version is also going to take much time. So if, you know, Linux is traditionally faster than Windows, right? So if you run a Linux on a Windows, it's going to be much faster than running a Windows on a Windows. Okay? We'll see why that is the case. And we'll come back to this. As I talk, I list some of the benefits. So it's really basically summarizing what all you can do with virtualization. Okay, so let's go to this. So you have kind of, this is how it will kind of look like for a hosted architecture where you have the host operating system and then several virtual machines running on them. And the virtual machine monitor, as you see, really kind of mediates everything between the virtual machine and the underlying hardware. And the virtual machine monitor is running actually as an application on the host operating system. Okay, so when you install Oracle VirtualBox on Windows 7 operating system, it's running really as an application on Windows 7. Okay, so now what will happen is, let's say there is a, where is that slide? So that slide is, so now let's say one application running on a virtual machine wants to execute, say, a privileged instruction, for example, writing to a file. So as I said, this guest operating system cannot do it on its own. Why? Consider this to be of a different ISA. Let's say this is a Mac operating system running on top of, say, a Windows operating system. So, and the underlying hardware will be then x86 because this is Windows running on physical hardware, should have to be some x86 hardware. So a Mac cannot interact with x86 directly because a Mac will have an ISA that is different than the Windows x86 ISA. So the instruction given by this Mac application, okay, has to be really captured by this virtual machine monitor, and it has to do what is called a binary translation. Basically, the instruction has to be translated. The instruction set architecture from the Mac or PowerPC platform to this. So you have to do kind of like a code translation or a binary translation. The instruction in one kind of architecture has to be translated to the other architecture. And the VMM does that. So that's why it's heavily loaded. It's bulky. Okay? So it does the translation. And once it does the translation, it issues a kind of system call to the host operating system. And as I said, an instance of the VMM is running as an application in the host operating system. So whatever this instruction, this virtual machine wanted to execute on the underlying hardware, it is executed by the virtual machine monitor or the hypervisor as its own instruction on the hardware through the host operating system. Because this instruction is translated to an instruction set architecture for which this can, using which this can run on this hardware, right? So that's the translation. Okay, so whatever the Mac wants to do on this, but the Mac instruction set will be based on what? The PowerPC hardware. That instruction set architecture has to be translated to a Windows and x86 in this example. Okay? So it will be as if the virtual machine monitor is running that instruction on the hardware through the host operating system. And let's say the host operating system was doing some other operation. As we do multiprocessing, you're running, say, a Word document, you're browsing something in the internet. So it's similar to this now. So when you switch from one application to another, what happens? A context switch happens, right? In the underlying, the memory and all those things. So when you want to run an instruction on the virtual machine, coming to the virtual machine, everything on the host side needs to be suspended. So we have to really save all the process state and everything in the host world, that's why I call the host world, and then run the virtual machine instruction as an instruction on the host operating system. And then the results have to be then again sent back to the virtual machine monitor, which kind of delivers it to the virtual machine here. So even if you run multiple virtual machines, right, we don't really get all the speed up that you will expect, because why? All these virtual machines will have to go through this route, through the hypervisor, and then have the instructions executed by the host operating system on the underlying hardware. So even though you think you can really do some parallel computing, you cannot, because you have to still go through the host operating system. So that's why you see that kind of slowdown, right? If the resources in your underlying host operating system is not really good enough, you have, say, little low RAM and the processor speed is not much, then you will see that slowdown. Okay? So that's why when you want to run your virtual machines, you should have really good processor speed and then good memory, RAM, and also good amount of hard disk space, because you need good virtual memory also to pass things back and forth. Okay?
So what happens when you stop running the virtual machine, like the computer?
If you terminate the virtual machine, that memory will be released.
Okay.
So the host machine gets back the available memory, and you can check on that when you have run it on a personal computer. Check how much memory is being used when the machine is running, and check how much is released once virtual machine is terminated. It may take a while for memory to be released to boot up your host machine and then see, then it will be probably more free. Okay. But you will see still some reduction in the memory in the hard disk, at least, because now you are storing that image on your computer. So that virtual machine, even though it's not running, an ISO, an image of it will be saved on a hard disk, because when you want to rerun it, you have to load it, right? So it's actually again starting the virtual machine, right? So the image will take some space. So your hard disk could have lost some space, okay? But not much space as if when it is running. You'll see that. So this is actually like you're storing a big executable in your machine. So when you store the executable, you do lose some space. because you want, if you could delete that, then you'll reclaim all the space. But you store the virtual machine, of course not running, but it is there as a dormant file. So that file will take up some space. It's a huge file, of course. It's an image of an operating system, so it will take some space. Okay? So this is what's going on with hosted architecture, and this type of implementation, this is a very common implementation of a hosted architecture. We are going to see kind of two possible implementations for hosted architecture. This is one implementation of it by doing what's called this binary translation. Now, as I said, the weakness of it is the overhead involved in doing all this context switch, and that technique is called either binary translation, or you can also call it as full virtualization. Okay, so they are both the same. Okay, so this is one way of doing the or implementing the hosted architecture. Okay. Now, the other way of doing it is called the para-virtualization. As I said, because of the context switch happens to host operating system, you are not really running the virtual machines in parallel, and you are not really kind of getting any much speed up. The other option is to do what is called para-virtualization, or which means parallel virtualization. What it means is, again, in the full virtualization, the guest operating system was not allowed to touch or access anything on the hardware directly, because it had a different instruction set architecture which is not compatible with the underlying hardware. That was the problem, right? As I said, this is a Mac operating system, and you cannot do anything on the Intel hardware, so you have to have compatible instruction set architecture. With the parallel virtualization approach, what you do is you change the code of the guest operating system so that it has now the instruction set architecture that can interact with different hardware. So if it runs on x86, it will now have the instruction set architecture that can interact with x86 in addition to its own architecture, let's say a PowerPC. Okay? So which means the guest operating system, the code of it has to be what? It's like open source. It should be available to be for change. Okay? So not all operating systems will let you to change the code. Say Windows doesn't allow you to change the code. But for example, if you use Linux, you can change the code of the operating system. Okay? So only certain operating systems, which are what? Open source operating systems, will support this parallel virtualization. Why this is better? Because if a guest operating system has the compatible instruction set architecture, each virtual machine can access the underlying hardware on its own. So now you kind of get that parallel view, right? Because as this is accessing the hardware, this one can also access the hardware, as long as they don't compete for the same resource. If they compete for the same resource, then the virtual machine monitor has to schedule which one gets access to what. Okay? So we'll see that quickly. That can be done too. The virtual machine monitor can kind of allocate upfront what resources are available for what virtual machine. If that could be done, then it could be even faster, because at runtime they don't have to really conflict with or fight with each other and need this resource, because each one knows what they can access. So each virtual machine will access only that particular resource. They won't ask for somebody else's resource. Only if they kind of won't use the same resource at the same time, then the hypervisor has to come in the picture and kind of mediate and allocate which resource has to be used by which virtual machine. Okay? So until that time, the hypervisor won't interfere. So it is kind of now lightly loaded because it doesn't do much, and so it's again faster. And the host operating system is not disturbed. Each virtual machine can do things on its own. Okay, but still it is more on a research stage. It's not yet commercial as much as full virtualization is. But there's one virtualization software that's available to support para-virtualization. Okay, so you have to know some virtualization software names for each category. Okay. Now the third one is called hardware-assisted virtualization. The first two, the binary translation, para-virtualization, as I said, could be used for implementing a hosted architecture, whereas a hardware-assisted virtualization is used to implement the other category, which is called the bare metal architecture. Why? Because the things that we saw so far, I said, what? The first category first implementation of full virtualization, we didn't change anything with the host, with the guest operating system. We let everything to be run by the host operating system. The second type I said, we changed the code of the guest operating system so that it can interact with the underlying hardware. The first two, we didn't touch anything on the hardware. We didn't change the hardware, right, or make it compatible for all these things. We can use the traditional hardware. The third category, the hardware assisted, as the name itself tells, you make the hardware to be able to support virtualization. Okay, so far the first two, we don't need the hardware to be virtualization aware. The third category, you make the hardware to be virtualization aware. So nowadays, if you buy a computer, most of the time people make sure whether they see this VT, it is virtualization aware. Intel VT or AMD VT, every hardware manufacturer now are making the hardware to be virtualization aware. Otherwise, if you now want to run your virtual machine on your Intel machine, if it's not hardware supported, it doesn't support this, then you have to go through the first two approach. Otherwise, you cannot really run your virtual machines. Okay, because why? If the hardware is virtualization aware, it's going to be much faster compared to the full virtualization or binary translation, and even better than the parallel virtualization. Because here the hardware is going to support this kind of access by the virtual machines. Okay? Here? So this is normally used for bare metal architecture because you could run any operating system and the hardware will support the virtualization on the top of it. So the hardware assisted virtualization is used for bare metal, whereas the full virtualization and the parallel virtualization are used to implement the hosted architecture. Okay? So let me draw it here. So two architectures, hosted and what is bare metal, and this one can be implemented using full virtualization or parallel virtualization, and this one can be implemented with hardware assist. Okay? So you should not confuse between these things. Now, how many of you have taken or at least taking now the networks course? 1, 2, 3, 4.
The networks.
Computer networks. You're taking now? Okay. So at least taking now, right? But you might not have covered much. Okay, so we're going to talk about certain things which you may have taken for granted or assume they are there. Okay? Not only this chapter, I'll talk about firewalls after this. So you have to know certain or take certain things for granted. Okay. All right. So now, how these virtual machines are going to be connected to the internet or the network? Okay. So there are three ways they can be connected to the network. Okay. So again, you can imagine like a lab scenario where you have your host operating system, and you have your virtual machine running on the top of it, and you have several other lab computers, right? So in a network environment like say Jackson State Network, there used to be a server called a DHCP server that is in charge of allocating or assigning IP addresses. Okay. So IP addresses are kind of like unique IDs for computers, you can think like that. They are 32 bits, and they have a kind of a prefix part and a suffix part. Why I write 143.132? This is the network prefix for Jackson State network. Okay? The suffix part could be the remaining. Each is like 8 bits. So 8, 32 bits. So the last 16 bits will be the suffix part, and the first 16 bits form the network part. Okay? At least for Jackson State, we have different classes also, so I don't want to go through all those things. Now, we call things like a public IP address and a private IP address. A public IP address means only one machine in the entire internet will have that IP address. A private IP address is only locally unique. It could be unique within that network or within that machine, like you're running several virtual machines within a host machine. All these virtual machines could get a private IP address that is unique within that local environment. Okay. Now, if you run it on, say, a LAN environment like this, your virtual machines could get a public IP address. Why? Because they could connect to the underlying network and interact with the DHCP server. Okay? It depends on how you set up the network access. So when you do this second project, you could play with the network connection also, even though the project probably doesn't require you to do that. Explore the networking options on the virtual box when you kind of load it up, and look for probably something to do with network adapter or network settings. There you can really see at least these three options. There will be probably some more. A bridged option, NAT or network address translation, host only option. A bridged option lets your virtual machine to get a public IP address. Okay? So that can happen only if you run it on a public network like this, where there is possibility of getting a public IP address. If you run it on your home, on your personal computer, where your host machine itself gets a kind of private IP address from your Ethernet gateway, your virtual machine also gets only a private IP address. Okay? Whereas when you run it on a public network like this, where you have a DHCP server that you assign a public IP address, you can enable the bridged option. Okay? Which means what? A bridged option lets the virtual machine to be kind of independent of the underlying host operating system. Every packet or data it wants to send can go through by itself. It doesn't have to go through a host operating system. Okay? It can do whatever it wants. The virtual machine can do whatever it wants without really depending on the host operating system. On the other hand, if you enable the NAT option, what it means is the host operating system acts as a kind of a gateway. Okay? So the virtual machines can still connect to the internet, but they have to go through the host operating system that acts as a gateway to the internet. In the bridge case, the virtual machine can directly access the internet, whereas in the NAT case, it has to go through the host operating system to access the internet. And the IP address the virtual machine gets is basically assigned by the host operating system. So it will be usually this 192, that prefix. Okay, so the private IP addresses have some predefined prefixes, so that's what you can have. Okay, and private IP addresses, machines with private IP addresses cannot directly access the internet; they have to go through a gateway. And in this case, the host operating system itself acts as the gateway. Okay. And in the third case, which is say host-only option, and before that, let's say if there are multiple virtual machines running on the host machine, okay? In even the first two options, they can interact with each other. So if you run more than one virtual machine on the same host, you can do some ping, as we tried this, which is used to test whether the other machine is running or not. So if you know the IP address of the other virtual machine, you can run a command like this and you see if you get some reply packets from the other machine. Okay? So you type ping and the IP address of the other machine in your command line DOS prompt, then you should get a reply from the other machine. Okay? If it is running. On the host only option, it's all the same as the NAT option. The only difference is the virtual machines cannot connect to the internet. All the communication they can do is only within the host. That's why it's called host only option. They cannot interact with the outside world. Okay? So normally we don't do this unless you really want to, what you call, protect your other machines from any sort of attack or anything, or if you don't do some testing or any kind of security related issue, then you may want to run your virtual machines on host only mode. Otherwise you don't run them in that. Okay? Clear? So sometimes when your virtual machine is not connecting to the internet, okay, check your networking options. So if it's host only, it will not connect to the internet. So make sure it is running at least as a NAT only option. Preferably if you are on a public network, again, public IP address are so scarce, so you may not get a public IP address even if you run it on a bridge mode. Okay, so most of the time people use the NAT option because it's easy to get the private IP address. It's locally assigned by the host. Okay,
Dr.
you can
Med,
do whatever you want by connecting to the internet and everything.
Dr. Med,
Yes.
does the protocol still react and play the same way when you use the virtual machine?
What's that?
When you're using the NAT, the network address translator, are the protocols still?
Yeah, everything will run, but
still
it is slower because everything has to go through that gateway.
Okay.
Okay. And if you run, I think, as I said, you could run your servers like a file server, database server as on a virtual machine, right? A virtual machine server. Then would you go for a NAT or a bridged option? Let's say I'm running my web server for Jackson State as a virtual machine. Okay. Would I go for a bridged option or a network or a NAT option?
NAT.
Why? You said NAT, you said bridged, right? NAT? Nobody said bridged?
I said NAT because of the security. There's a Jackson State.
Yeah, but you know, when you run a server, say a web server for Jackson State, you want the outside world to connect to you, right?
Right.
With both options, it can connect to you, but one problem with the private IP address is, as I said, it's locally unique, right? So there may be private IP address for this machine could be this. Some other machine somewhere else in the world can also have the same IP address, right? So if you really want to run a server, and this comes from networking, right? So your IP address has to be what's called a public IP address, and of course it has to be static IP address. Static IP address means every time the machine boots up, it gets the same IP address. On the other hand, if you are on a LAN environment like this, even though your machine could get a public IP address, every time it boots up, it is not guaranteed to get the same IP address if it is not assigned a static IP address. Okay? So in terms of that, IP addresses could be classified as dynamic IP address and static IP address. One is public-private classification, the other is dynamic and static. So public IP addresses itself could be either dynamic